Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the NEXUS Infrastructure PLC Introduction to eSmart Networks Investor Presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll, and if you'd give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company will be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand you over to CEO Mike Morris. Good morning to you, sir.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's presentation. Yes, my name is Mike Morris, CEO of NEXUS Infrastructure. We wanted to start the session with a short video to give you a really good feel for the business. But the bottom line is the world needs cleaning up, and eSmart Networks has a big part to play in that. Helping the UK hit net zero targets by 2050 is the business we are in. By electrifying transport, electrifying industry, as well as powering the UK with clean energy, all delivered over the grid. Today, you will hear how we operate in each of these segments, and we are doing it now. Other parts of NEXUS have a role to play in the energy transition, but eSmart Networks is a net zero pure play, and I want to bring it into clear focus today. I will introduce my co-speaker Simon shortly, but let me explain how we will spend the hour. To start, I will share 5 themes for you to keep in mind as you listen to the presentation. Simon will describe the markets and opportunity, plus some case studies to show you what we really do. And then I will cover strategy and managing significant growth. We will finish with about 15 minutes for questions. Let me introduce you to Simon, the Managing Director of eSmart Networks. He studied electrical engineering at Queen's University in Belfast. After 10 years in leadership positions at UK Power Networks, he joined TriConX, our sister company, as Technical Director in 2016. In 2018, he became the Managing Director of eSmart Networks. While doing this, he completed his MBA at Warwick University. In Simon, we have an outstanding managing director and a leading authority on electrification. As for me, my interest in climate change goes back to a Prince of Wales sustainability programme at Cambridge University in 2011. That year, we created TriConX, our first energy startup. 5 years later, I purchased my first electric vehicle to experience it from an owner's perspective. It wasn't great, to be honest, but it did help validate our internal thinking on EV infrastructure. And a year later, in 2018, we started eSmart Networks. Simon and I are both absolutely committed to creating a cleaner, brighter future. Our vision, combined with our business experience, means we are well positioned for future growth. eSmart Networks has a big part to play in energy transition, and here are 5 reasons why. Our total addressable market is massive. Climate crisis is one of the great challenges of our time, and electrification is the route to net zero. Short, medium, and long term, the work to be done is staggering. First mover advantage. 5 years in, eSmart Networks is the first EV infrastructure company to establish itself as a national business. The customer base and expertise acquired in that time has made us the leading EV infrastructure business. There's no need to pick the winning EV brand. Our market includes all the charge point operators, hardware suppliers, and end users. We're at the center of the EV world and address the full market, no matter who the owner or operator is. We are an experienced and entrepreneurial management team with a track record in energy and a track record in scaling up, which is key as this is a highly scalable business. With a national presence and first mover advantage, we are in a strong position to scale. So I've given you an introduction to eSmart Networks. Simon will now take you through the detail.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for that glowing introduction. It has made me blush slightly. I'm going to start with the regulatory landscape that we're operating in today. It has been a very busy 3 years in terms of the regulatory landscape within the UK, so much so that unless, like us, you live and breathe it every day, it can be very hard to keep up to date. It's very important to note that the UK laws and framework that we operate all exist within a very aggressive international push to drastically reduce greenhouse emissions. This all really got serious at the Paris 2015 COP, which led to the November 2020 UK government 10-point plan that finally banned internal combustion engine cars from sale in 2030 in the UK. In December 2020, the UK government set out its carbon budgets for our near-term binding targets. And in December 2020, the white paper came out with a lot more detail on how we're going to get there. In June 2020, the binding targets were set for 78% lower emissions compared to 1990 by 2035. And then we had the COP26 in Glasgow just last year. And this is all designed to get us to net zero by 2050. Some key points of our policy now. Net zero by 2050 is law. It was enacted in our Parliament through the Climate Change Act. The internal combustion engine ban by 2030 is also the law and is being followed now internationally, and not just places you would expect like California, but recently New York State, for example, announced an ICE ban by 2035 as well. There is no other way to make net zero, which is a law, without mass electrification of transport, industry and heating, which we will explore in this deck. The result, there is massive opportunities in the electrification of transport and industry, and we are well positioned for this opportunity, as you will see during this presentation. Both the charts above show the total input of energy into the UK split by its source: electricity, hydrogen, natural gas, oil, petroleum, and biosource on the left-hand side. They also show how this energy is ultimately used on the right-hand side, split by industry, residential, transport, aviation, and shipping. The flows in the middle show how the energy gets from its various sources of supply to its ultimate end use. The chart on the left-hand side shows the energy sources, flows, and use in 2020, the last year we had good data for, while the chart on the right-hand side shows what the world will look like in 2050, all according to National Grid's future energy customer transformation scenario, which is a bit of a mouthful, which is updated annually. So the left-hand side then in 2020, so electricity makes up 20% of all energy consumed in the UK, mostly industrial and residential, although we can start to see flows into electric vehicles for transport. Natural gas is very dominant today, which is very typical given what's going on in the gas wholesale markets and consequently our energy prices. And this is used for the majority of residential heating and is also used extensively in industry. It's no surprise to anyone that diesel and oil makes up the vast majority today of our transport requirements for obvious reasons, but this mix has to change. We simply cannot get to net zero if we continue to burn gas, oil and petrol. So 2050 then, the chart on the right hand side, according to National Grid's customer transformation scenario. So by 2050, natural gas, oil and petrol have now been largely eliminated, with electricity filling the gaps. Electricity now makes up the majority of our energy requirements, nearly 80%. Clearly, this will require massive and unprecedented infrastructure investment, which will lead to electrification of transport, industry and heat. Natural gas has now become a very minor role to play where some processes cannot be electrified, such as very high heat industrial processes and chemical feedstock processes as well. This increase from 20% today to 80% in the future is a staggering increase and is the only viable way we will get to net zero, which again is law, by 2050. So this is a complex chart, I will admit, but I will make it more accessible, hopefully, when I explain it. This is a more detailed view of what the world will look like in 2050, again, according to National Grid's future energy scenario. So on the left-hand side of the graph, this is the supply into the UK by its various sources: gas, nuclear, solar, offshore wind, onshore wind, and other renewables such as biosource. The areas with the eSmart Networks logo is where we plan, design, and build the infrastructure for this generation and enable its connection to the electricity grid. In the middle are the flows of energy through the various transformations until it gets to its ultimate use. So for example, some electricity does get converted to hydrogen via electrolysis for use in aviation and shipping. On the right hand side is where the energy is used. Again, where you see our logo is where we plan, design, and build the infrastructure required to get this energy from the grid. The vast majority of the industrial load in 2050 is now electric, as is residential, largely because heat has been electrified, as has transport, which of course is because of electric vehicles. So what do we do in this mix? So on the supply side, we model out the grid to identify where the capacity is to enable low cost, fast connections, and then we design and physically build this infrastructure. On the demand side, we use the same in-house skills to model the network and plan to identify, again, where the capacity is. We then design and build this infrastructure, but we also, very importantly, integrate renewable technologies such as PV and wind, batteries, and electric vehicle provisions into this demand connections we build on the demand side. A bit of a word on hydrogen, which is quite topical. We do believe hydrogen will have a very important role to play in the future. For example, aviation, shipping, and some very high heat industrial applications really lend themselves to using hydrogen. But even then, as you can see in the chart, it will come from electricity. So hydrogen will also have a very important role to play in grid balancing. So when we have excess generation, we will make hydrogen available on site and store it. And then at peak times, when we have more demand than we have good green generation, we will burn this hydrogen, which creates zero emissions, allowing us to use all our clean generation, which is clearly very desirable. But this all requires substantial grid infrastructure to enable it. So in summary, in this slide, we operate at the supply side of the grid, which is generation. We operate on the demand side and integrate renewable technologies as well as operate in the middle, for example, where hydrogen is used for electrolysis, for grid balancing and battery storage as well. Also to note, TriConnex, our sister company, also operate within the residential space, which gives a wider group very wide exposure to the energy transition. So I'm going to talk about our business model and ecosystem now. So we do have a very integrated ecosystem and business models where all the areas are highly adjacent and highly additive to each other. So the grid, first of all, so the grid, and it is no coincidence that it's in the center of our Venn diagram because it really is the center of our ecosystem. So we use the same in-house skills, modeling capability, and systems across all three market segments. This gives us very high efficiencies and means that the three areas are highly interrelated and all mutually reinforce each other. So turning to electric vehicles, first of all, in the green. So this is mostly high-powered hubs for EV networks. Now, we can't disclose who our customers are in this area because of confidentiality, but they are all big names in the high-speed charging arena, which you would recognize from the news. Typically, these projects are 6 to 8 350 kilowatt high-powered DC chargers. Now, to put that into perspective, 300 kilowatt, one 300 kilowatt charger is enough energy to supply 300 houses. So this is substantial infrastructure we're talking about. Also in our EV market segment is buses. So these are bus operators who need to electrify their depots. Now, you may have seen recently the Mayor of London announced that TfL will only allow electric buses from now on in London. And very topically, on Saturday, the government released a consultation on which date to set a ban on the sale of internal combustion engine buses and coaches. And the consultation is basically which date will it be between 2025 and 2032. Also in our EV market segment is fleet electrification. This is for last mile, middle mile, lots of miles, and work fleets. And we are working with some of the biggest fleet operators around the country in this area for the electrification of vans, delivery vehicles, and the car fleet as well. Lastly, in our EV segment is destination charging, and this is where people go and spend longer dwell times, such as supermarkets, gyms, etc. And we have already delivered a rollout program for one of the large national supermarkets, and we have other of these schemes in the planning phase right now. So our second market segment in the blue is renewable generation. These are grid connections for very large scale solar parks predominantly. So these are 50 megawatts, covers 200 acres of land for the biggest developers, as well as grid connections for other renewables such as onshore wind, which is now coming back, and biomass as well. Lastly, we have industrial electrification. These are large, what we call mega sheds, huge warehouses, which are driven by the move to online shopping that also requires heavy renewable integration. It also includes advanced low carbon food production facilities, as well as highly automated warehousing with really large electrical loads. It's important to note that while these are three distinct market segments with different customers who have different requirements, the same engineering, solution finding, design, and build resources are used across all three market segments, giving us good visibility and good economies across the business. A bit of a talk through of our really explosive growth then. So back in 2017, when EVs really were early market, we were seeing a demand in our sister company, TriConnex, for our residential house building customers for EV charging. But also we started to be approached by non-TriConnex customers for EV charging as well, such as Lidl and other supermarkets actually at the time. These different customers had very different requirements, and it was a different market we recognized early. So we created eSmart Networks to capitalize on this massive opportunity, combining the wider group's in-depth electrical, commercial, and civil engineering capabilities. In 2018, we formed eSmart Networks, and we had very early success, securing over 100 rapid charging points rollout across the country. This was for motor fuel groups actually, to electrify all their petrol stations and forecourts. In 2019, we successfully delivered this large program of works and had further successes in securing more large programs. And by now, EV was in the news and was becoming a national priority. By 2020, we had really diversified the customer base, working with the vast majority of the charge point network operators out there, and still are. A highlight in 2020 was installing the first battery storage system to support ultra high-speed DC charging for Ionity, actually the big joint venture with Volkswagen, Mercedes, etc. And in 2021, this is when we really seen the explosive growth. We secured £20 million of new work. We turned over £9 million in revenue, and importantly, we generated a profit. So unlike practically every other player in this space, we generate sustainable operating profits now. Revenue growth from 2020 to 2022 has seen an approx CAGR of 120%, and the three market segments are growing well, although EV is and remains our largest segment, and this is forecast to continue. We, very importantly, have an active pipeline of 436 million, giving us good visibility in the medium term, and we do talk about this pipeline in a bit more detail later on. So I've talked about the grid a bit, so I'll just cover what our different segments are. So first of all, grid modeling. So we use highly specialized and sophisticated load flow software to model out the very constrained electricity grid in terms of load flows, thermal capacity, fault levels, and voltage rise. This enables us to pinpoint where the capacity is available, both on the supply side and the demand side, allowing our customers to connect quicker and with the lowest capital cost. This is a key differentiator, as the capacity on the electricity grid is constrained and really is becoming more constrained as we go through the EV rollout. We then turn to our advanced design capability. So from our modeling stage, we secure the connection for our customers, and then using our dedicated in-house skilled and very experienced design engineers, we value engineer both the connection and the wider infrastructure to protect the investment levels of our customers. Proximity to investor funds. So this ability to really value engineer the connections means that we work directly with the investment funds at an early stage in the project lifecycle, as grid costs are typically the biggest variable within their financial models and carry significant risk. We then move on to portfolio management. So because we have this proximity to the investment funds, means we typically work across their entire pipelines in a portfolio method right across the country. So we can prioritize our portfolios in terms of delivering their most viable sites first, their most attractive sites, which increases their return on investment right across their portfolio. If we're not involved, the process takes much longer. So for example, to get an answer from the distribution network operator on if there is capacity or not on a certain part of the network for, say, a 50 megawatt solar scheme, takes 90 days. Yep, 90 days, and costs £7,000 for the privilege of an answer. We do that in a matter of days or weeks, depending on the need. We operate a standard process right across the business, which we call concept to go live, which is illustrated on the slide. So very briefly, it starts with this really early engagement, early on in the project lifecycle or the portfolio lifecycle with the customer. We do this capacity modeling piece. We then review the entire portfolio and prioritize it in terms of best investments to least best, and present this back to the clients. They've got a good visibility of what they should do when, and they then prioritize their own investment plans. We then take this optimized portfolio back and we create realistic, timed, sure delivery plans right across the UK. We then carry out the detailed electrical and civil design work in-house, value engineering the projects at every stage. We then, using our in-house teams, install the infrastructure, we commission the infrastructure, and we make it live, which is when our customers start generating their revenue. This process applies across all three of our market segments, and given the absolute land grab that is going on in the industry right now, our processes and everything about our company is built for speed, which is vitally important for our customers. Compare that with the 90-day yes or no approach from the distribution network operator. So turning to our market segments then, just to describe them in a bit more detail. First of all, we'll look at the electric vehicle infrastructure market. So today, there are 40,000 charge points across the UK. And according to the Society of Manufacturers and Traders, the SMMT, I struggle to say that, we will need approximately 2.7 million by 2030, which is a massive increase by anyone's standards. Now, it doesn't matter what report you look at here, be it the SMMT, the AA, National Grid, the UK Transport Strategy, or the government's EV infrastructure strategy, that was launched on Friday. They all say the same thing. We need a staggering increase on electric vehicle charge points. The SMMT estimate that the infrastructure alone, the infrastructure costs of this massive rollout by 2030 will be 17 billion. Now, we have delivered a lot of this infrastructure already, so we know how much it costs to plan, design, and install this infrastructure. And the bit that we do typically makes up 50% of the total spend on one of these projects. The balance, the other 50%, is things like the charging hardware, land, software, permits, things like that. This means that we can see an £8.3 billion market out to 2030 for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Using the visibility from our own customers and the wider market, we are able to estimate the market values across the three main areas of EV that we are highly active in. Number one is car charging. That's worth about 4.5 billion, the biggest segment, but then there are the most cars. Buses, a significant segment of 1.4 billion, and then fleet in the middle at 2.4 billion. And to give a bit of color on those segments, I've got a bit of a case study we'll look at now. But the main takeaway here is that every report you look at, every forecast, the market is massive without a shadow of a doubt. So case study on our first area EV, which is cars. So this is a case study for a company that plans 100 electric vehicle forecourts. Yes, we now have electric vehicle forecourts with no diesel or petrol in them across the UK, and the first one is already open and running. The loads at these sites, the electrical loads they need are massive. Just to put it into perspective, each one of these forecourts needs the same electrical capacity that would supply 6,500 houses. That is a town. For the technical out there, that's a 6 MVA 33,000 volt connection. The average contract value for us for these is in around £1 million, and we currently have 4 of these in the business right now at various stage of design and build, and actually 2 will be simultaneously going live, so in the build process right now. And they will open in autumn 2022. You will see a big rise in electric vehicle forecourts towards the end of this year and into next. We are now working with the same company on a national program for forecourts and hubs as their grid partner, and we are doing a lot of capacity modeling, and I've actually modeled out over 200 sites that are actually viable for the forecourts, and they are now in the planning and delivery cycle. Buses are second area. So this is a pan-European bus operator which is transitioning its fleet to 100% electric buses, and last year they ordered 150 BYD 100% electric buses. They had extremely challenging timelines given the TfL contract deliverables they had. These are sites that are very space constrained, they're very tight sites physically, and they're very complex, and they're in very highly electrically loaded urban areas such as Fulwell in South London, Harrow and Edgware, and they are very densely populated, which again means that the grids are very complex and densely loaded. The typical electrical demand for one of these bus depots is the same power for about 2,000 houses. Again, that's very significant in highly built up areas. And the average contract value for us here is about 750,000. We delivered 2 of these last year. We've got 2 in build now, and there's about 5 in the pipeline. Fulwell, one of our projects, as an example, needed a 3 MVA, so that's about 3,000 houses worth of electricity, but the local distribution network operator told them this would cost £3 million and take 3 years to complete because the network needed significant major reinforcement. But they had to start operating these buses in October, and they were told this in June. So clearly a major business risk for this bus operator. So we took a project on, we modeled out the local 11,000 volt network, and we quickly identified that there was 1 MVA available right now, and that with minimal reinforcement, which costs £600,000, which is lower than 3 million, 3 MVA would be available overnight when the demand is low, everyone's in bed. So we worked with BYD to map out the demand of the buses and when they needed their maximum demands over the 24-hour cycle, and we designed an innovative and first of its kind solution where from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, the bus depot can draw 1 MVA from the network, and from 10 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock the following morning, they can demand the full 3 MVA. And because we modeled this out, we knew, and it has now since been delivered, that is enough energy capacity through the night to fully charge all our buses ready for the morning run out. This site all went live in October in time for the delivery of the new buses. This problem-solving ability means we're now working on their full portfolio, again giving us good visibility of their future forward pipeline. Next segment is, and the last of EV, is fleet. So this case study was 3 sites. We converted to 100% electric last mile delivery vans. So every site had hundreds of vans, a big American online retailer. Rapid delivery was required here, and we had to operate around some very strange seasonal demands in November when they get their peak workload. So these were very tight time frames we had to deliver in. These contract values are around 600,000 to £2 million to us to date, and this customer has a large pipeline we're now delivering across the UK and Ireland for fleet electrification. So turning to industrial electrification, then our middle segment. So the chart on the left hand side shows the supply of energy to industry in 2020. Again, it's split by its source: electricity, natural gas, hydrogen, oil and petrol, while the chart on the right hand side shows a scenario in 2050. Currently, 35% of the energy used in industry is from electricity. Natural gas makes up the majority, with significant oil, which surprises a lot of people. By 2050, electricity will make up 80% of this mix, which mirrors the wider electrification of the UK industry we talked about earlier on. As well as a shift to electricity, we're seeing immediate demand right now for large warehousing, advanced automation warehousing, and low carbon indoor food production facilities. On most of these projects, the integration of the grid supply, electric vehicles, and renewable generation on one site is key for true low carbon productions and our customers' ESG agenda, and we add huge value in this integration piece here. Again, speed is vitally important. Compare the waiting the 90 days from the distribution network operator to get an answer that may include millions of reinforcement years down the line. We do this all in a matter of weeks. Got a case study on industry electrification. So this client came to us in autumn 2020 with a large mega shed, 750,000. It's the biggest building I've seen in my life. Massive mega shed that was due to be opened in spring 2021. But the distribution network operator had told them the 8 MVA required would cost them £5 million and take 3 years to complete. At this stage, the client had already started construction, so clearly this could not be allowed to happen. So we took this project on. We quickly modeled out the local 11,000 volt and 33,000 volt network, and we rapidly installed a 2 MVA connection because we could see the 2 MVA was available to get them going. They needed this to draw down a 100,000 square foot freezer, a massive freezer, and unbelievably it took 2 months to draw this thing down to minus 20 degrees. But we installed this connection while we sorted out the long-term connection and got them away. So in the background, while we were doing this, we completed the required reinforcement on the local 11 kV network to free up the 6 MVA. And I think this was about £200,000 or £300,000 worth of reinforcement rather than the £5 million. And we went live with everything on time in July 2021. Our solution here saved the client £3 million and accelerated that program by 2.5 million years, which is as staggering as that sounds. We've also designed that solution to incorporate 6 MVA of roof-mounted solar generation, which will allow that site and that customer to sell 100% green electricity to the grid. We are now working with this client on their forward pipeline of sites across both the UK and Ireland. Renewable infrastructure then, our third market segment. So the top line of this, the graph on the left-hand side shows the I've been talking too long now. Shows the national grid's projection for solar going forward to 2030 across the 5 scenarios. The scenarios are called leading the way, which we feel is too aggressive, steady state, which will actually miss net zero, so isn't viable, but customer transformation is the most reasonable and the most likely. So you can see from the graph on the top, we have 13 gigawatts of installed capacity today, which will rise to 30.8 gigawatts by 2030, a large 106% increase, as shown in the middle chart, which compares 2020 to 2030. Now we know, because we deliver this, what pounds per megawatt cost solar developers need to keep the cost under for a viable project so they can earn a return on the investment. So that means that we can easily calculate the size of this market. So if you look at the pie chart on the right hand side, 354 million is what's called D&O non-contestable costs. So this is high voltage work that is not open to competition that the D&O have to do. So this is upstream of their network that we don't get involved in. But the remainder, the 534 million, is contestable work. This is the work that we plan, design and build. So that gives us the size of the market for that area. On the bottom of the slide is onshore wind. So it works in the same way. The left-hand graph shows the forecast wind over time, with the center graph showing that we move from 12.7 gigawatts to 26.6 gigawatts by 2030, which, using the same calculations as solar, we know is worth 408 million for the infrastructure that we build, design and install. So taken together, the market for our infrastructure is 942 million out to 2030, which is a significant market, but of course secondary to the much bigger market of electric vehicle infrastructure. There are very high regulatory and technical barriers around this work that we do. We are specially accredited from Lloyd's Register that allows us to plan, design and build high voltage electricity networks up to 132,000 volts. A case study in renewable infrastructure. So typically solar developers, first of all, they find land that is near grid assets like an overhead line or a substation. They sign heads of terms with that landowner and then they investigate if the grid can accept this generation or not. This is a time consuming and drawn out process, only for the D&O to say no, there's no capacity, so then they move on. We've turned this process completely on its head. So we model out all the networks across the country. So we've identified strips of land where there is capacity on the overhead lines predominantly, but some cables as well. We issue this to our developer customers. They then have a map of the UK that shows them where there's capacity. So they only approach landowners where they know there is capacity and they know how much it will cost to connect. So they've got really accurate models that they can then base their commercial negotiations with the landowner on. This gives our developer customers and us very good visibility of the pipelines out into the future. Thankfully, that is the end of my bit. I will now hand back to Mike to finish the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Simon. As you can see, the opportunity is a significant one for us, and we feel like we are very well positioned for future growth. To support future growth, we need a few things, right? We need strong leadership, a plan that really understands the needs and the nuances of the market, and a highly skilled team. Firstly, strong leadership. Track record is everything in business, and we have a proven team at the top. Little more on the team later. A focused business plan is crucial, and we have a clear plan for each of those three areas that we operate in. From concept to go live, there is a process that works across each revenue stream. Our plan focuses on market segments that are both high growth and sustainable. Our activities have very high barriers to entry. This work is extremely specialized, and a lot of it is in a regulated environment. So whether it's our in-house grid modeling or stacking 2 or 3 technologies to design a solution, the work is technically sophisticated. The talent pool for this sector is very small. We are recruiting high quality from across the UK. It's because people are attracted by our mission on net zero and the chance to make a difference. The DNOs, the distribution network operators, they are the best pool of electrical talent and a primary target for recruitment. eSmart Networks has access to the full market, supply side and demand side. In EV, our biggest market, we have a presence in all parts of the ecosystem. So whether it's fully electric forecourts, large fleets and buses. TriConnex will make a significant contribution to net zero in its own right, but that's a presentation for another day. The reason it has a slide today is track record. We are seeing a lot of EV businesses with quite inexperienced management team, quite unproven, great ideas, but have they got that execution experience? Supporting organic growth in a startup is not new to us. So whether it's that strong leadership, knowing how to attract talent, accessing the market in a heavily regulated space, these are things we have a track record of in TriConnex. For TriConnex in 2011, we prioritised two things in particular. Firstly, solving customers' problems, and they were normally complex problems. And secondly, consistent delivery. If you solve those complex problems and deliver consistently, customers return time and time again. So our job is to replicate this repeat business model in eSmart Networks as we deliver our forward order book. So TriConnex has given us 10 years of expertise on the grid. You know, that created this exciting adjacency into electrification. But it's also given us the tools and the experience to know how to scale a business. A key part of my job is to build a great team. We did it at TriConnex and we are doing it at eSmart Networks. The useful thing about having done it before is that you learn a lot of lessons, often by your mistakes. We recognise that individual talent is really important, but it's the team that makes the difference. And that's the culture in our business. As Michael Jordan said in The Last Dance, talent wins games, teamwork wins championships. An important lesson from TriConnex in building that team was the blend of the old and the new. Too much old can generate groupthink and too much new can be unmanageable. So direct reports into Simon are 50% old and 50% new. Chris Dora and Matt Richardson bring the NEXUS DNA and were involved in TriConnex right from the start. So they've been there and they've got the t-shirt on an energy startup. David and Christine bring in the new. That's experience and a different perspective. The other lesson for us in startups is that below the leadership line, the majority needs to be new and hired with great precision. Every hire should be well thought through. Below the leadership team for us, we're at 80% new employees. We now are a team of over 80 and that will grow as we scale. So our focus takes up a lot of our time and energy is to recruit and retain the best and then invest in their development. Electrical engineers in operations and electrical designers in technical are the scarcest resort in EV infrastructure. DNO recruitment is a priority, as we've said, and the team of 20 grid specialists led by David McDonald in our Belfast office is a key part that separates us from the rest. Part of having a clear plan is strategic objectives that everyone in the organisation understands and are committed to. Our people know that every decision we make comes back to these four objectives. Firstly, we are about the long term. This is not a sprint and then taking your foot off the pedal. The growth opportunities in eSmart Networks are significant in the short, medium and long term. We are building a business to last, 100% pure play, made for net zero. Secondly, that equates to outsized growth over the next 3 to 5 years and clearly beyond. As net zero momentum builds, we are resourcing and scaling accordingly. Thirdly, other businesses in EV will struggle to make money. We were profitable last year and we will be this year. We're not here to burn through a lot of cash just because it's available. We are here to make money. And finally, we're a capital-light business. We invested 2.5 million to create eSmart Networks, and we don't need any additional capital to grow organically. We are cash generative and agile. As you can see, we had a step change in growth last year, and we will do so again this year. Dominated by EV, but renewables and industry really starting to build. So the order book was 3.8 million, September 2020, 13.5 million last September, It's up significantly at the half year, which is the end of this week. We are seeing extensive early work on portfolios last year, now maturing into predictable wins this year and going forward. We have helped operators focus on feasible projects, allowing them to complete their negotiation with landowners where they can deliver quickly rather than waste a ton of time and money. There is a spread of pipeline across a wide range of targeted customers, and future visibility assists our resource planning. Multiple customers protect us against any one portfolio stalling and provides a regular flow of new work into design. So our pipeline covers the three segments from the Venn diagram, and we have specialist sales teams in each one managing sector-specific customer needs. Given the size of the market and our pipeline, we've been very selective on customers and projects, and we expect margin pressure to be upwards as we build to a critical mass. I said at the beginning, eSmart Networks will be a high-growth business in energy transition. Now you know the business better, I'd like to revisit those 5 reasons. A massive addressable market. Simon's first slide on regulatory landscape made an important statement. Net zero by 2050 is law, and electrification is the route to net zero. Electricity supplied 20% of the UK's energy needs in 2020. This will rise to 78% by 2050. Our addressable market of over 9 billion, only through to 2030, there's more beyond, and our future pipeline demonstrates how well positioned we are to grow. eSmart Networks is the first EV-focused infrastructure company to establish itself at scale in the market. From concept to go live, we are the company to partner with on high-powered charging of cars, fleets and buses. This early mover advantage in EV, combined with our modelling and design capability on the grid, creates a strong competitive moat. Most EV investment opportunities are exposed to a particular operator or hardware manufacturer. Our market includes all operators, manufacturers and end users. All roads lead to eSmart Networks. We are a highly experienced and entrepreneurial management team with a track record on strategy and execution. We see this as a fantastic opportunity to do well by doing good, and we have the capability in the team to make it happen. This is a capital-light, highly skilled business with a great outlook. It has a national presence, and with first mover advantage, it has put itself in a great position to scale. We will double the business this year and double the year after. So while the longer term is very, very exciting, our aim in 22 and 23 is to double and double again. Finally, I should highlight that everything you've heard today is organic. There is scope for consolidation, and we see an opportunity to accelerate growth with a transaction in 22-23. Thank you for listening. Now there's time for questions, and there's a few questions come through.
Mike, that's great. Mike, Simon, thank you very much indeed for your presentation today. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just using the Q&A tab that's situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while Mike and Simon take a few moments to review those questions submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Mike, Simon, as you can see, we've received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. Thank you to all investors for submitting their questions. If I could please ask you just to run through that Q&A tab, and where it's appropriate to do so, read out the questions and give your response, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So the first question is from Jake. Given the market cap valuation of competitor Podpoint that recently IPO'd and currently has a 300 mil market capitalization, do you believe the market is not valuing eSmart correctly in the context of NEXUS share price? Yes, we do. We do agree with that, Jake. I think we've got that read across, and we've got other comparables with private equity. But our job is to tell the story, is to educate the market, and that's what we've started, and that's what we've started to do. So I think we'll be patient, and that will come through. You know, that quality will come to the top. I think our job, as well as telling the story, is continuing to deliver, and that's what we're obsessive about internally. So yes, I do agree with the point in your question, but I think we've got a plan to move the needle there. Second question, there's 2 questions from Nick B. Simon, if you can take the first one, I'll take the second one. Can you expand on the customer mix and revenue split? Do any customers represent a high percentage of the total revenue?
Oh, I can't see that question. Sorry, repeat that, Mike. I can't see it.
Also, can you expand on the customer mix and revenue split? Do any customers represent a high percentage of the total?
Yeah, no problem. So unfortunately, we can't talk about our individual customers because of the confidentiality, but broadly in the EV sector, there's about 16 major customers we have. So that it is quite diverse, actually. So we're not dominated by one big customer there. It's very diverse. And in the INC and renewable market segments, we've got about 4 major customers each. There's a tail of smaller ones, but there's 4 major ones. So across all 3 areas, where we are very diverse. I think it was in the slides earlier on what the revenue splits are, but it's certainly majority EV and has been and will continue to be majority EV, 60% EV, 60% plus going forward, and then the other 2 split roughly half and half, renewables and INC.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Nick's first part of the question was, what do you see as the USP for TriConX? So, Nick, TriConX builds network in gas, water, electric, fiber, and EV. So it offers 5 services. So I guess the real USP, it designs and build those instead of going to 5 different providers, Thames Water, UKPN, PodPoint, etc. They can come to TriConX and they can get all 5 services. Question on inflation, Simon. How are you managing inflationary pressures on the business?
So the vast majority of the contracts that we enter into with our customers are our own specific terms and conditions. And within that, it gives us the right to pass on things like copper price increases, aluminium, steel, commodity price increases. Over, I think it's over 80% of our order book is in that state. So, and that's a legacy thing in the electricity industry where copper was always a risk. So we always built that into our contracts anyway, and that also gives us good coverage to pass on inflationary pressures. The balance is not on our terms and conditions, tends to be on JCT and NEC type frameworks, where again we've got some mechanisms in there to pass on price increases. But very importantly, we want to be transparent with our customers. So we have a weekly update from our buying teams to our estimating team. So we've got a very short cycle in terms of how we price projects.
Thanks, Simon. Question from James. Please, could you help us understand what the margin structure and cash flow profile for the business looks like, medium, long term? I'll take that. I mean, in the short term, we're looking at 2 to 3% net margins, and we're looking to grow that to high single digits over the sort of 3 to 4 year period. We're looking to be comparable with TriConX margins, which are at 9 to 10% net. In terms of cash flow, the business is in good shape from a cash flow point of view. The terms are sensible, and the business is always in a cash positive position, which I think, as Simon and I both alluded to today, is quite unusual in the EV space. So I think margins, we're profitable, and margins are heading in the right direction, and cash flow profile is positive. There's a question, Simon, on, is there scope for recurring revenue within the EV charging point installed base, so maintenance, servicing, or upgrades?
Upgrades is an interesting one. So already we have seen a few projects now where we installed the first electrical infrastructure 3 years ago, and now we're back upgrading that infrastructure with updated hardware. So we are finding that the hardware in this world, it's not very long-lived hardware like the actual transformers and networks are. The chargers tend to have a shorter life cycle. So definitely, not just is there opportunity, we are doing that. We are upgrading sites that were installed quite a while ago. On the maintenance and service side, we keep that under constant review, but we don't do that now. We judge that to be a fairly commoditized low margin area that doesn't fit within our higher margin main design and construction work. So while we keep it under review, it's not something we're currently involved in because of margin pressures we see in that world.
Thanks, Simon. There's a question, Philip, what is the smallest project, presumably residential, that you consider for a project? Firstly, Philip, eSmart Networks doesn't do any residential, so any residential EV sits in Triconex. It is strictly the sectors that Simon has outlined today. In terms of the smallest project, the average order size has grown quite significantly over the last 18 months. How would you explain the range, Simon?
Physically, the smallest projects that we look at are 50 kilowatt chargers and above. So, those contract values would be 20,000. Below that, it's a more commoditized national scale business, and we concentrate on the more complex where we can add the higher value. So 50 kilowatt DC charging and above. We generally don't get involved in AC charging because it's relatively simple. And it's mostly residential, as Mike says, that sits within Triconex.
Over the next 5 years, this is from Memo, over the next 5 years, how sustainable is the current CAGR trajectory? Simon, would you like to pick up on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I outlined, the market is absolutely massive here. And if we triangulate the 17 billion, for example, at the SMMT, we're talking about roughly half of which is to ours. Even just looking at government stimulus, so the Charging Investment Fund, the CIF, which was launched last year, is 400 million. And already we have turned some of that over because the money that Zook Capital put into one of their customers, we are the installation partner there. The Rapid Charging Fund, which the government launched end of last year, and they just updated in their infrastructure charging strategy, come out on Friday. That's a 950 million pound fund, which is specifically there to fund the high voltage apparatus and reinforcement for motorway service areas. So exactly where our market is. So that 950 million is for the work we do. And then launched on Friday as part of the government's EV charging strategy was a 450 levy, which is the local electric vehicle infrastructure fund. So this is to fund local authorities to fund large amounts of residential on-street parking. So this isn't residential in the house like Triconex does, but out in the street, hundreds of chargers. So even looking at government stimulus, and bearing in mind that the government's approach is that we will stimulate, but the private market will pick up the most of this, then we see stable, high growth, which generates high CAGRs going out into the future without a shadow of a doubt.
Thanks, Simon. We're at 12:30. If I could just quickly do one, Philip, it's going to be a quick answer, but I assume that being capital light, you will rely upon additional recruitment to be able to support the growth. I don't think we're relying on recruitment only, but it is key. We have created our own academy to grow our own, bringing graduates in, and the Belfast piece is important again because Belfast University is the finest university in the UK for electrical design and electrical engineers. But I think it's the deep knowledge and skill set we have, combined with the early mover and the very, very high barriers of entry. That's what's going to underpin our growth. But yeah, there is a scarcity of the right people, but we think we've got a plan to grow our own, as well as attracting those that are experienced and proven. So I think we're there.
Mike, Simon, that's great. Thank you very much indeed for addressing all of those questions that have come through from investors. And of course, we will make all the questions submitted today available to you immediately after the presentation has ended. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll publish all those responses where it's appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform and notify you by email when these are ready for your review. Mike, perhaps before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please ask you for a few closing comments, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Look, thank you for joining us today. I know everybody's really busy. I hope you found it useful. I wanted you to get a picture really of how much knowledge and expertise we've built in the last 5 years. And I think we're sort of sitting in a different place to most businesses in this kind of early EV world. And also that we're a really experienced management team we're on an absolute mission to become market leaders in electrification. It's been a great start to 2022 for eSmart Networks, and we look forward to speaking to you again later in the year to share our successes and future plans. So thanks again, everybody.
That's great. Mike, Simon, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to update investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Nexus Infrastructure PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.